I was 17 when my life ended and began, all in the same moment. It wasn't a car crash. It wasn't a diagnosis. It was a sentence, one line, delivered without a flicker of emotion. You can't stay here. That's what my father said when I told him I was pregnant. My mother didn't say anything. She just crossed her arms and looked away, like she couldn't bear to watch me unravel under my own choices. The silence that followed was louder than any scream I'd ever heard. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding onto the back of the chair, like it might keep me from falling apart right there in the kitchen. The baby was his Ryan's. We'd been together almost a year. Or maybe we'd just been convenient for each other that long. Either way, when I told him, he disappeared. I didn't blame him. Not really. People can only give what they have. But that didn't stop me from hating the way his absence became another weight I had to carry alone. When my parents kicked me out, I had no plan, no money, no one except my grandmother, Margaret. She lived 3 towns away, in a house that always smelled like lavender and worn-out books. When I showed up at her door with a single backpack and too many bruises you couldn't see, she didn't ask why I was there. She just opened her arms. That night, she made tea and tucked me into the guest room like I was still a little girl who needed to believe the world was soft. The next morning, she said, "If you're going to have a baby, we need to make a list." So we made one. Diapers, vitamins, a job, a future. The job came first. I started working at a diner downtown. Mornings were slow. Nights were brutal. I wore shoes that pinched and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. But I earned enough for food, enough to pay Margaret back in small ways. New curtains, gas for her car, fresh fruit on the table. And slowly, the silence inside me began to shift. The baby grew. So did I. Not gracefully, not all at once, but in little moments like the first time I learned to cook something without burning it, or when I caught myself humming during my shift, or when I looked at my growing belly and didn't flinch. I used to think becoming a mother would erase me. What I didn't know was, it would introduce me to the version of myself I never knew existed. I was still scared. I was still angry. But I was no longer empty. Margaret never asked about my parents, never said their names. She just stood beside me like a lighthouse, steady and bright. No matter how rough the tide, she sewed blankets for the baby. She taught me how to breathe through pain. She never once made me feel like I was a burden. That winter, I gave birth to a son, Noah. He was small, red-faced, angry at the world, just like me. But when he wrapped his fingers around mine, something inside me snapped into place. I didn't know how to be a mother, but I knew I'd never let him feel the kind of abandonment I had, not if it killed me. That night, in the quiet of Margaret's living room, I held Noah against my chest and whispered, "You're not a mistake." And I meant it. With everything I had left, the days after Noah was born were a blur of aching muscles, midnight feedings, and moments of such raw exhaustion I'd forget what day it was. But even in the fog, I knew I was never alone. Margaret was there holding Noah when I needed a shower, warming bottles before I even asked, humming lullabies from a life that felt gentler than mine. She never took over. She just filled in the cracks when I couldn't stand. I went back to work 6 weeks after giving birth. The diner manager wasn't thrilled, but he gave me the lunch shift just enough hours to scrape by. I left Noah with a retired neighbor Margaret trusted, and I cried the first time I walked away from him. I cried a lot back then, not always for a reason. Sometimes just because the weight of surviving pressed down hard. Other times because I looked at Noah's tiny face and felt something like purpose. I didn't have friends. At 17, no one knew what to say to the girl who brought her baby to grocery stores and paid in crumpled bills. They looked at me with pity or judgment, sometimes both. But I stopped noticing after a while. I had diapers to change, bottles to wash, rent to help cover. My world was small, but it was full. Every night, I'd crawl into bed sore and aching, but I'd always check on Noah one last time, press a kiss to his forehead, whisper that I loved him, promise him tomorrow. Even when I didn't know what tomorrow looked like, Margaret kept me grounded. She reminded me that love wasn't something earned, it was given, daily, even when it was hard, and she gave it. To me, to Noah, without ever asking for anything in return. Once, while folding laundry, she looked over at me and said, "I'm proud of you, Ava." I remember freezing, just for a second, because I couldn't remember the last time anyone had said that to me. I didn't cry then, but later, alone, I let it come. Not because I felt weak, but because I finally felt seen. Time moved strangely in those years. Noah grew faster than I could believe. 1 minute, he was wobbling across the living room carpet. The next, he was running down the driveway with scraped knees and a grin that made strangers smile. He had my eyes, Ryan's chin, and something entirely his own, a quiet confidence, a softness I never knew how to protect in myself. I never told him about his father, not because I wanted to hide the truth, but because I wanted him to know who he was first, before he learned who hadn't stayed. Some nights, when the house was still, I'd think about Ryan, wonder if he ever regretted leaving, wonder if he ever thought about the child he'd never met. But I never let those thoughts linger. They didn't feed Noah. They didn't pay bills. They didn't make me stronger. What did? The way Noah looked at me like I was his whole world. The way Margaret held both of us like we were enough. And one day, I realized something I hadn't dared to believe before. Maybe I was enough, even without parents who claimed me, even without a partner who stood beside me, even without a map. I was building something, tiny brick by tiny brick. A life, a home, a family. And I didn't need anyone else to define it for me anymore. It happened on a Tuesday. I was halfway through the lunch rush, plates clinking, orders piling. My hair stuck to the back of my neck with sweat when I spun too fast from the counter and slammed into him. A full cup of black coffee spilled straight down the front of his shirt. I gasped, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." The man took a half step back, looked down at his now ruined button-up, and then he laughed. Actually laughed. Not out of shock. Not sarcastically. Just laughed. "That's one way to wake up," he said, smiling. I blinked. Most people would have snapped, demanded free meals, thrown a fit. This man looked like he had all the time in the world. He was tall, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a quiet way of holding himself like nothing could truly rattle him. "I'll comp your meal," I said quickly, reaching for napkins. "Only if you promise not to feel bad about it," he replied, still dabbing at his shirt with zero urgency. I don't know what struck me more, his calm, or the fact that he didn't once make me feel small. He came back the next day, and the next, always around the same time, always with a book in hand. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. But I started noticing things. How he tipped well, even for a single cup of coffee. How he greeted every server like they mattered. How he never asked questions that pried, but remembered the ones that mattered. One afternoon, as I refilled his mug, he said, "You always look like you're carrying the weight of 5 worlds." I raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific." He grinned. "Only 5 because you hide the rest pretty well." I don't know why that made something catch in my chest. Maybe because no one had looked closely in a long time. His name was Caleb. He worked in finance, lived alone, had a dog named Murphy who, according to him, had more personality than most people. He didn't flirt. He didn't try to impress me. He just showed up, consistently, quietly, like a gentle knock on a door I'd long forgotten how to open. One evening, after my shift, I walked out to find him sitting on the bench outside the diner. He looked up, then held out a paper cup. "Extra cream, no sugar. That's how you take it," Right. I hesitated, took the cup, sat beside him. We didn't talk much, just watched cars pass in the growing dark. But I remember thinking, this feels safe, not exciting, not electric, just safe. And after years of chaos and survival, that felt like a miracle. I didn't invite him in. I didn't give him my number, but I smiled when I walked away, and he smiled back. And somehow, that was enough to make the air feel warmer than it had in a long, long time. I didn't plan on letting Caleb in, not because I didn't like him, but because I didn't trust how much I did. I had built my life like a fortress, brick by brick, fear by fear. Letting someone in meant exposing the fragile structure underneath, and I wasn't sure anything inside could survive another collapse. But Caleb never pushed. He showed up at the diner a few times a week, never lingered too long, never asked why I looked tired or where I disappeared to on weekends. He just stayed present, and that presence, over time, became a kind of comfort. One day, I saw him outside the grocery store while Noah and I were juggling bags. Noah was 4, then restless, curious, constantly asking questions about clouds and dogs and why jelly was purple. Caleb spotted us, crossed the parking lot without hesitation, and said, "Need a hand." I almost said no out of reflex, but then Noah looked up at him and asked, "Are you the man from the diner?" Caleb knelt to his level. "Guilty. You drink too much coffee," Noah announced. Caleb laughed. "That's probably true." Then he offered to carry our bags. I didn't stop him. At home, Margaret raised one eyebrow when she saw Caleb helping me unload groceries. She didn't say anything, just gave me that look grandmothers have when they see something before you do. We had coffee on the porch while Noah built a tower out of soup cans. Caleb didn't try to impress me. He just asked questions about books, about music, about the first meal I ever cooked that didn't end in disaster. I told him about the time I tried to make pasta at 16 and turned it into glue. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Noah watched us from the steps, quiet at first. Then he asked, "Do you like spaghetti?" Caleb said, "Only if someone else cooks it." That was the moment Noah smiled. Not a small smile, a full, unguarded, toothy grin. It caught me off guard. Later that night, when Noah was asleep, I stood in the doorway and just watched him breathe. Margaret joined me. "You're scared," she said. I didn't deny it. "You think letting him in will undo everything you fought to build." I nodded. But what if it adds to it? That question stayed with me for days. Caleb didn't try to see me every moment, but when he did, he was fully there. He listened. He remembered small things. He made Noah laugh without trying, and he never once made me feel like I had to be anyone but exactly who I was. I started looking forward to those days, to his voice, to the way he made the world feel less heavy, even if just for a while. I didn't call it love, not yet, but I knew what it wasn't. It wasn't fear. It wasn't performance. It wasn't pretending to be fine. It was honest. It was patient. And it was growing. Quietly. Steadily. Like something I didn't plant. But maybe, just maybe, was finally ready to water. It started with a letter. No return address. Just my name. In a handwriting I hadn't seen since I was 17. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen table for 3 days, like it might lose its meaning if I ignored it long enough. But letters don't forget you. Eventually, I slid my finger under the seal. It was from my parents. After 20 years of silence, 20 years of missed birthdays, of empty holidays, of never once asking how I was. And now, a letter. It didn't say we're sorry. It said, we'd like to visit. No explanation, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Just a request. Margaret watched me read it, said nothing. She didn't have to. The tension in my shoulders said it all. Caleb noticed too. He didn't push, just held me a little longer that night when we lay on the couch, Noah asleep upstairs. "What are you afraid of?" he asked quietly. "That they'll expect me to still be the girl they abandoned," I whispered. "And what if they do?" I exhaled. "Then they'll be disappointed." I didn't respond to the letter, but a week later, they showed up anyway. I heard the knock, and before I could move, Noah was at the door, pulling it open. Two faces I hadn't seen in 2 decades stood on the porch. Older, thinner, smaller than I remembered. My mother said, "Ava," like it was still hers to say. Noah looked between us, confused. I stepped forward. "I'm Ava," I said, "and this is my son. His name is Noah. You've never met him." My father opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "Don't speak yet," I said. We stood there for a long moment. Then I stepped outside, closed the door behind me. I didn't let them in. Not yet. We sat on the porch steps. They said they'd been watching from afar, that they saw Noah's name in a news article he'd made the dean's list at his medical school, that they were proud. I looked at them and said the first thing that came to my heart, "You don't get to be proud." They flinched. "You weren't there when I was 17 and terrified, when I gave birth alone, when I scrubbed floors to buy formula." They looked down. "You don't get to skip the hard parts and claim the victory." Silence. Then my mother whispered, "We were wrong. We thought we were doing what was best. We were scared." "So was I said. But I stayed." They asked if they could get to know Noah. I said I'd think about it. That night, I told Caleb what happened. He asked, "Do you want them in your life?" I didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "I want Noah to know where he comes from, but I don't want to forget where I've been." He nodded. "You don't have to choose one or the other." Maybe he was right. Maybe healing wasn't about rewriting the past. Maybe it was about deciding how much space you give it in your present. And for the first time, I realized that choice was mine to make. Caleb and I were steady by then. Not perfect, but steady. He loved me in a way I had never known quietly, without performance. He didn't need to rescue me. He just stood beside me, through every storm, and let me be strong in my own right. Some days, I'd watch him and Noah talk about music or politics, or something as small as what kind of socks felt best in winter, and I'd feel this wave of gratitude so big, it almost scared me, because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. I had a partner who didn't demand I shrink, a son who reminded me of all the good I had left in the world, and a home that didn't echo with silence and shame. But still there was that ache, the one I carried for years, buried under work and motherhood and the 1,000 little distractions that keep pain at bay. It wasn't about my parents anymore. Not really. It was about the girl I used to be, the 17-year-old version of me, who stood in her childhood kitchen and was told she wasn't welcome in her own home. I had never forgiven her for trusting the wrong people, for being naive, for getting pregnant, for falling apart, for not knowing better. I carried her like a secret I wanted to hide but never could. Until one night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom, journal in hand, and wrote her a letter. "Dear Ava, I'm sorry I was so hard on you. You did the best you could with what you had, and what you had wasn't enough, not love, not safety, not truth, but you made something out of the wreckage. You kept going. You protected your son. You built a life that no one gave you permission to build. I'm proud of you. I love you. And I forgive you." When I finished writing, I didn't cry. I just felt quiet, like something had finally settled. Later that week, I invited my parents to coffee, not at my house, not at theirs, a public place neutral, calm. They arrived early, nervous, hopeful. I didn't hug them, but I didn't flinch either. I let them talk. They told me things I hadn't expected to hear about their regrets, about the church group that told them they were doing the right thing, about how they watched every milestone from afar. I wanted to call. My mother said, so many times, but I thought I'd make it worse. You did, I said gently, but I also understand now that you were living with fear, and fear does strange things to people. My father looked at me then, eyes red. We want to be in your life again. In Noah's life. I stirred my coffee. You may get that chance, but not on your timeline, and not on your terms. They both nodded. I left the cafe not with resolution, but with something better: boundaries. A quiet knowing that I didn't owe them access just because they'd finally found their guilt. Caleb held my hand that night as we watched the news in silence. You okay? He asked. I think so, I said. For the first time, I think I really am. And I meant it, because forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't something you give to others so they can sleep at night. It's something you give to yourself so you can wake up free. There are moments you can feel in your bones. They don't need music or applause. They just live inside you forever. The day Noah put on his white coat for the first time was one of those moments. He stood in front of the mirror, the sleeves just slightly too long, grinning like a kid who had finally caught up to the future he'd been chasing since he was old enough to say, I want to be a doctor. I stood behind him, arms crossed, trying not to cry. Margaret sat on the couch, beaming with quiet pride. Caleb took pictures, even though Noah kept rolling his eyes and saying, come on, this isn't prom. But I didn't care, because I wanted proof, not just for him, but for me, proof that all those years of 3 ARs, me, feedings, bargain groceries, skipped birthdays, and secondhand everything had led to this, that nothing had been wasted. After the ceremony, we stood outside the auditorium. My parents came, they sat near the back, didn't say much, but clapped when his name was called. Noah shook hands with professors, smiled for photos, accepted compliments with a kind of grounded humility I had never seen in a 21-year-old. Later, he found me in the crowd. Mom, he said, pulling me aside, I couldn't have done this without you. I wanted to say something wise, something he'd remember years from now. But all I managed was, yes, you could have, but I'm really glad you didn't have to. He hugged me then, tighter than he had in years, and for the first time, I let myself feel all of it. The pride, the release, the full circle ache of it all. Caleb slipped his hand into mine as we watched Noah laugh with his friends. You did good, he whispered. I nodded, because I had, not perfectly, not without mistakes, but fully, I had shown up every day, even when I had nothing left to give, and somehow, that had been enough. We celebrated with pizza and cheap wine at home, surrounded by Margaret's flowers and Noah's textbooks stacked like trophies on the kitchen counter. No one made speeches. But when I looked around the room at the boy I had raised, the man I had let love me, the woman who never let go of my hand, I felt something deep in my chest loosen. I wasn't just proud of Noah, I was proud of myself, for surviving, for healing, for raising a child who never once had to wonder if he was wanted. I tucked that feeling into my heart like a letter I'd never send. And that night, as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I paused at the doorway to Noah's room. He was asleep, a little taller now, a little more grown, but still my boy, still the reason I never gave up. I whispered, you were never the mistake, and closed the door, knowing neither was I. I never thought I'd write to him, but one afternoon, while Noah was at the hospital and Caleb was fixing the sink, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a pen in my hand, and Ryan's name in the corner of the page. I didn't know what I wanted to say. I just knew I needed to say something. So I began, Dear Ryan, it's been over 20 years since you walked away. I used to think of that moment every day, like a movie I couldn't stop rewinding. You, backing out of the driveway, Me, clutching a test in my hand. The look on your face when I said the words "I'm pregnant." You weren't ready. I get that now. But I wasn't ready either. And I stayed. Not because I was brave, because I didn't have a choice. And maybe that's what separates us. You ran. I rooted. You disappeared. I became someone I didn't even recognize, and slowly, someone I could be proud of. Noah is 21 now. He's kind, smart, steady. He doesn't know you, but he doesn't carry a hole where you should be, because I never let him. I filled his life with love, with books, with messy mornings and bedtime stories and the kind of patience I never thought I had. He didn't grow up asking where his father was. He grew up knowing who his mother was. I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty. I'm writing it to release you, and to release myself. You were part of my story, but not the whole story, not the best part. I don't hate you, but I don't carry you anymore. Not in my anger, not in my shame, not even in my memory. I let you go a long time ago. This is just the last knot I needed to untie. Goodbye, Ava. I folded the letter, didn't seal it, didn't address it, just slid it into the back of my journal, between grocery lists and recipes and poems I wrote in the quiet. And then I stood up, poured myself a glass of water, and went outside. The sky was soft with late-day sun. Noah would be home soon. Caleb was singing off-key through the window. Margaret was somewhere upstairs humming a tune I knew by heart. I looked around at this life, this messy, beautiful, unplanned life, and I smiled. Because I had survived everything meant to break me. And somehow, I didn't just survive, I bloomed. People think healing is loud. They think it comes with grand gestures and dramatic reunions and moments that shift the sky. But mine came in whispers. It came in Caleb's quiet hands washing dishes beside me, in Margaret's steady voice humming in the next room, in Noah's arms wrapping around my shoulders after a long day. Healing came when I stopped needing permission to take up space, when I looked in the mirror and didn't see a mistake, or a survivor, or even a mother. Just a woman, whole, enough, and free. I don't carry the anger anymore. Not for my parents, not for Ryan, not even for the version of myself that once believed she was easy to leave. I've stopped rewriting the past. I've stopped wondering what could have been, because what is this home, this love, this quiet joy was worth every ache it took to build. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt like you were too broken to be chosen, let me tell you, you are not a mistake. You are not disposable. You are not the silence someone else left behind. You are the story. You are the voice. You are the light that came after the fire. And I promise you, that's more than enough.